Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Missing Frames. This is the podcast where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. We're hanging out on the Nerd Party Network, a network of podcasts devoted to giving you all things entertainment. So check it out at thenerdparty.com. Follow us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, and you can like the Facebook page, The Nerd Party. Follow the Instagram, which is also at The Nerd Party. But I'm very excited today to welcome back to the show a gentleman who has not been on for far too long, and that is Alex Calleros from the Lessons from the Screenplay team. Alex, welcome back.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
This time we're switching the tables, or is that what you call it? Flipping the tables, whatever it is, whatever the situation is.
We've had a problem on Lessons from the Screen, or on Beyond the Screenplay on our podcast. Michael is always trying to throw out idioms or and it was always. This always happens. It's like, wait, is that the idiom? Is that the saying? I don't know.
Is that the correct idiom? Is this something? Should I have planned this beforehand? Probably. But you know what? On Missing Frames, we just
roll with it.
It's all organic. It's all natural. It's all real. So we like to get that. But
the tables have turned. The tables have turned. That's what we're doing here.
I think it took way too long for either of us to recall what that phrase actually was, but that's okay. It happened in real time. But last time you were on, I introduced you to a film, and that was what it was with your fellow co-hosts and team members from the Lessons from the Screenplay and Beyond the Screenplay team. We had Michael and Trisha and Brian. I'd introduced them to films first time around, and now they're introducing me to some of their favorite films, and it's your turn to introduce me to one of your favorite films. And what is that favorite film, Alex?
So you asked me to think of what are some films that are favorites of mine that you may not have seen, and one of my favorite films that is just not widely known or not widely seen is The Brothers Bloom by Rian Johnson, which was his second film after Brick. And it's a film that kind of went under the radar, I guess, because, after that was Looper, which made a bigger splash, and, it was a time travel movie, and just kind of, I think it's more of a genre film that people were attracted to. Right.
And as far as I remember, after Looper, he didn't really do anything else. I think he just kind of faded off into the ether.
He just was done after that. So but Brothers Bloom is a movie that I liked Brick from a kind of a style perspective, but I wasn't like super taken with it the way a lot of people were. But I was really taken with The Brothers Bloom. I think that this movie was when I was like, who is this guy? Who is this Rian Johnson guy? Because he's like going above and beyond with his direction here, and I'm just so charmed and delighted by everything he's doing. I don't know if it's all like perfect or good or like even makes sense, but I'm enjoying all of it, and I think Knives Out is kind of his perfecting what he began in The Brothers Bloom. I think just as far as the tone and style and energy of The Brothers Bloom, I felt in Knives Out, but kind of in a more perfect package. So I'm interested to see if you agree with that when you see the movie.
I'm really excited to watch it, and it's funny you say that because I've never heard, like, Brothers Bloom is so under the radar, and when you mentioned it, I was like, I don't even know if I've heard of it the first time you mentioned it to me, and I looked it up and I was like, oh, Rian Johnson. I didn't even know like this was part of his. For some reason, I think I got this confused with there's one with Heath Ledger, and it's like a Brothers Grimm, I think, with Terry. Was that Terry Gilliam?
Yeah.
I think that's. I was like, is that the one where they're like fantasy and fairy tale and things like that? It is not at all, but it's interesting because so many people tend to like say Rian Johnson. I saw Brick and I loved him from the get go. You're saying it was this one that did it first,
right? And it's I think it's particular to me because I don't hear many other people say that, but
right.
But something about this movie just like charmed me so much. Like I was just delighted through and through after watching this film. So I'm curious to watch it again because it's been probably a few years now since I've seen it, since I've watched it. I have it on Blu-ray, but I watched it a lot when it first came out and got really into it, and then I just haven't seen it for a while. So I'm curious to see how it holds up for me and if I still feel the same way. But at least when I first saw it, I became a Rian Johnson fan from this film.
I think my introduction to Rian Johnson, and it's funny, my wife, she is a huge Rian Johnson fan. She knew about him before I did because she'd seen Brick and she loved Brick, and she was trying to get me to watch that for the longest time. We actually did an episode, I think almost almost a year ago, I just saw Brick for the first time, and I really enjoyed it. And it was one of those films that this doesn't happen often. I'm curious how often this has happened to you, but I was watching Brick and I was about 30 minutes in and I was like, I don't think I like this. I don't know how I feel. I don't understand really what's happening. And the dialogue is very stylized, so it's kind of difficult to follow in general.
Yes.
And then there was a point where suddenly I realized, oh, that's kind of the point. And also, I'm enjoying this more. It's starting to get a little bit more exciting and fun and fast paced. I remember it was the foot chase with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and whoever was chasing him, and then he like sticks out his foot and trips the guy. I remember that foot chase. I was like, okay, this is starting to pick up steam for me, and I'm starting to enjoy it more. But Brick was obviously not the first thing I saw. I think my introduction to Rian Johnson was Breaking Bad, like just the episodes he directed.
Yeah,
I think the episode Fly. I remember seeing that episode, not realizing that he directed it, but thinking this must have been some kind of guest director because it has this sort of visual flair that, you know, Breaking Bad is a very stylistic show, but even within that framework, that episode felt like a standout. So I remember saying, oh, Rian Johnson, I've heard of him. I know he did Brick and he's done a couple other things. And I think I saw Looper not long after that. So I was like, yeah, this Rian Johnson guy is pretty cool. And I saw Last Jedi and really enjoyed that. And of course, Ozymandias, which is probably the best Breaking Bad.
Right. I mean, he directed the best Breaking Bad episode ever, which is pretty awesome.
One of the best television shows ever. So as far as I was concerned, I really liked the guy. And just in general, Rian Johnson, just in terms of interviews and the way he seems to really, really love what he does. And and something else I really respect, he loves to invite people into that process. Like, it's not, you see a lot of young directors who are doing a particular kind of style, and sometimes they can come across as pretentious. Like, I'm thinking a lot of like P.T. Anderson when he was starting off. And I think he's much better now, and he's kind of chilled out a little bit. But he had a big ego when he was doing Boogie Nights and Magnolia. Very standoffish, kind of snobby. Mm-hmm. And Rian Johnson is almost like you could see a similar trajectory where it's like started off in stylistic indie films, but he's never felt like snobby. He's like, oh, yeah. Let me teach you. Let me tell you how I did this. So I've always admired him a lot.
Same. As someone who, you know, I've always watched directors and thought about like, oh, you know, I want to direct films. Do I fit into any of these molds? Like, could I be that person? And so often you see these directors that it's like their power and how they got their film done was by being really mean or being like really cold and intense and like stubborn. And Rian Johnson is a personality that like I identify with. And it's like, oh, no. You can be like Rian Johnson and also make a big movie. Like you can be a nice person.
Well, not just big, but great. Like, it's like, these are like Knives Out, like you said, Knives Out, and even The Last Jedi, which I know has its detractors and its fans, but like Last Jedi is a pretty amazing accomplishment no matter what way you look at it, that he was able to kind of wrestle this big franchise and do something with his own personal stamp on it.
Right.
And I've got to be honest, anyone who can take on, and when I say take on, he wasn't confrontational in the slightest, but if you can handle the sheer vitriolic reaction of a insane Star Wars fan and take that in stride and come through on the other side, like still being like jovial and excited and proud of what you did, that says a lot about him as a human being as well. I think that's extremely impressive. This is all to say I'm a big fan of his, and Brothers Bloom is just one that never, thinking about it, I guess I've seen every film of his except for Brothers Bloom.
I feel like most people have. It's like this weird, I don't know why everybody just skips over it.
I mean, obviously you love it. Do you think you find that people just are like, oh yeah, I saw it and I don't like it as much? Or what do you think in terms of when you discuss this film with people? Is it just that reaction, or is it more like what I'm saying, where it's like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that?
I think a lot of people just haven't seen it. You know, I think it got mixed reviews when it came out, and it, you can argue it's a messy film. Like, it kind of is all over the place tone wise in some cases. It's kind of, the style is really front and center, the same way it is with Brick and a lot of his movies. Yep. So if that is off-putting to you, then I can see how you just be like, oh, it's just too much in my face with its style. But I don't know. I mean, I think if you like Looper and you like Knives Out and his other work, I don't know why we would not enjoy Brothers Bloom. You know, it feels like a Rian Johnson movie. So I think just it for some reason people saw Brick and then I think they saw Looper and they didn't know this movie came out. And it's funny because it's really his first movie with a big budget. It's a big globe-trotting film.
Right. And it's got Mark Ruffalo and Adrian Brody and Rachel Weisz. So
Rachel Weisz is really the reason why I love it so much, because she just like is the most charming. You can maybe make an argument that the characters are too caricature-ish or too one-dimensional in some ways, but once again, I love almost like the storybook kind of world. It's like both like a storybook world that is a little bit like magical, but also very grounded, and it's about like con men and stuff. So I won't say much more. I want you to just experience it yourself. But
absolutely,
it's a weird movie in a lot of ways, but it worked for me.
Weird is good, and Rian Johnson weird is very good. So all right, well, let me try. I know that those three actors are in it.
Mm-hmm.
I know next to nothing about it, so I'm going to try to guess what what I think it's about, knowing absolutely nothing. All right, so if I were to take a guess, I'm going to say Mark Ruffalo and Adrian Brody are a couple of brothers, and they solve crimes together, and then Rachel Weisz shows up, and she's like the femme fatale, and suddenly they are both attracted to her, and they're like, hold on, we're not going to let a woman come between us and this. There's like a big heist they need to pull, but she's about to throw off their dynamic and their whole thing, their whole plan. And they're like, wait, we never thought love would come between us. We never factored love into the plan, or something like that. This is also giving zero credit to Rian Johnson, because this is such a trite, like cliched,
generic, like
so generic
girl coming in between the brothers. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I'll add to this that Rian, if this is, I assume I'm nowhere near close to describing this film, but I'm guessing if this were the movie, Rian Johnson would set that up and then kind of twist it and start to mess with that formula and start to play with it in a way that you would think like, I know where this is going. And then he'd be like, no. And he'd pull the rug out from under you and be like, this is actually where it is. And especially since you're referencing Knives Out, and I love the way, I mean, he does that a lot, but he does it in a way that's like very, very fun, and it's organic, and he's teetering on the edge of almost showing off, but it's never so far in that direction that you're just annoyed. You're always just kind of like, that's pretty cool. So that's my guess. It's a love triangle, but with heists and Rian Johnson twisty turny stuff.
No comment. We'll see what we'll see what's right and what's wrong.
You're so amazed that I was so on point with that you're speechless. That's how I'm taking this.
I will say that what you are definitely right about is the twisty turniness aspect. Yeah, so I'll just say that.
Well, good. All right, good. I got one thing right. Well, that's good. I think I am going to enjoy this. I'm very curious, especially as a bridge between Brick and Looper, and seeing an artist's second film or second project is always almost the more interesting one in a way than the first one, because it's kind of, you're starting to see them sort of become what they are going to be for the rest of their career.
Right.
Or almost sometimes you see, like in Guillermo del Toro's situation, he'd made an original film, and then he went and made a studio film that just completely, like, producers came in and were like, no, it has to be this, it has to be that, and it ruined his vision. So sometimes it's almost like, depending on the circumstances, and if this is a bigger production for Rian Johnson, I'm curious to see, does it feel compromised? Does it feel like he was having to find his way in a studio system and kind of overcome that, or did he excel in that area and just it didn't reach the right audience? So that's what I'm
I think what's interesting about Brothers Bloom is it feels like the best case scenario to me of a second film, where he was given obviously a lot of money compared to Brick, and he got to play with it and kind of do whatever he wanted with it. Like I don't get the feeling when I'm watching it that there's studio interference. So
right.
it really feels like Rian Johnson just kind of got to go to town with some money and have some fun. So that's probably part of why I love it, is that it's a totally original story with a big budget, great cast. It's no franchise, not even really a clear like genre. It's just kind of Rian Johnson doing his thing.
I mean, that appeals to me, so I am very excited to watch it. So we'll go watch. We'll be back to discuss it, and stay tuned.
Now available to own on video cassette.
All right, and we're back. Alex, I have conflicting feelings about this movie.
Join the club. I do too now.
Well, that's interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
This is going to be really fascinating for you because, again, this is one of your favorite movies, or it was. I don't know now because of what you're saying.
Well, it was one of my favorite movies that nobody had seen. I would say. I wouldn't say it's like it's like in my top 10.
Narrowing down the category.
But of movies that most people haven't seen or know about, it's like one that I've always been like, you should have seen it. It's worth seeing. It's a great, fun, cool Rian Johnson directorial vision. So yeah, I mean, maybe I'm hedging my bets right now, but I do. It was a very inspirational movie to me when it came out.
I completely get that. Like, it's not even. I feel very mixed about it. I didn't love it, and I think it has plenty. It has plenty of pros, but it has a lot of cons as well.
Yeah.
Cons. But like, it was one of those movies that I totally am like. If I come out of a movie feeling just like miserable or like, why did I watch that? It's just like, it's the worst feeling. And I did not feel that at all.
That's good.
We joke about, I wouldn't want to come into this being like that. I wouldn't want to ruin our conversation and our beautiful friendship. But like, there's something called, the sophomore slump. I almost would call this more of like a sophomore bump, like a bump in the road.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more like, as we were talking about in the first part, like you are almost more interested to see the filmmaker's second film, and in Rian Johnson's case, upstart, like up and coming indie filmmaker makes this really like awesome, stylistic, just kind of grabs you movie in Brick, and you're really excited to see where he goes from there. And I feel like he's testing the waters in a way. Like he's kind of like, all right, well, how far can I push? I have access to more resources. I have access to bigger names. It's my Hollywood movie. And I feel like he's really, it's more like he's testing the waters. And it's not a slump in a way the sophomore slump is, but I do feel like it's kind of like a weird,
it doesn't hold together. Like it's not one of those movies where you feel like there's this amazing cohesion and all the parts belong, and it kind of forms this whole that is more than the sum of its parts. I think it actually is more like the sum of its parts, which are uneven parts. So I think there's a lot of parts that I love in this movie and parts that I don't love, and it doesn't really transcend that mix. But what's interesting about this movie is that I now am thinking about it in the context of the time I saw it in, for myself as like a young, like just kind of fresh out of college aspiring filmmaker. And for that version of myself, it was a really exciting movie because I was less in the mindset of what makes for good writing or good story structure or even, consistent characters. And I was more in the mindset of like, I want to see directors kind of have fun with directing and show me things I haven't seen before and mix things and music and cinematography and all this stuff. And I think what this movie did for me was give me this thrill of like, who's this guy? Rian Johnson is having a lot of fun with all the tools at his disposal and really crafting a vision that is kind of a mess, but it's also really charming and also really dynamic and interesting, and there's something going on here that's special.
Well, it is. You do get the sense of that. You get the sense of him really stretching out and kind of like I said, testing the waters, testing himself, seeing really the extent of what he's capable of. It does feel very similar to Brick in terms of it's more stylized than Brick, and Brick is a very stylized movie, but I think Brick is kind of grounded in a reality, even though it's not quite reality. There are what feel like actual like stakes and what feel a little bit more like real people, even though everything is exaggerated and kind of absurd.
Dialogue is old timey and
yes,
stuff. Yeah.
dialogue is very, very, again, I struggled to understand Brick in that way. Brothers Bloom is much more cohesive in that regard. Like it's not it's designed for an audience to understand. Like
Right.
it's not being like, oh, it's so stylistic that you're gonna have to kind of work overtime as an
understand
audience member.
References for it to make
Right.
sense, or
Right, exactly. Like there's definitely a lot of like literary references where I'm like, okay, Rian Johnson, I
Right.
know you read
Yeah.
Ulysses, you read Moby Dick, I get it. But it's not like where Brick was a little bit harder to like penetrate. This one was definitely more like, oh, it's warm and accepting, and they kind of established that from the opening. What's crazy about it, as you said, the energy of it and the sense of kind of it's a little wacky in a way. Like it's the
Very
kind of
wacky.
movie where you can have Rachel Weisz on a tall unicycle just juggling
right.
chainsaws and flaming things. Like it's just kind of like when the movie started, I was kind of getting a little bit of Wes Anderson.
Oh, very
vibes.
Wes Anderson. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting because I think, Wes Anderson is a mixed bag for me. Some of his films like Moonrise Kingdom, I absolutely adore because it just, kind of melts my heart and I just fall in love with the characters. And I'm just, just like this movie, I'm just very charmed by it. Some of his films leave me feeling cold. They feel a little bit more distancing and more just, I'm being so aggressively Wes Anderson. You can't even really enjoy yourself because I'm just emphasizing my Wes Anderson-ness so hard, so much. And Brothers Bloom, I think, hit this interesting sweet spot for me at the time where I was attracted to the really kind of crafted nature of a Wes Anderson film, but was sometimes put off by that almost flat or like deadpan approach sometimes to characters or dialogue. And what I liked about Brothers Bloom was this kind of deep earnestness in it, as it both had some of that deadpan, slightly distancing humor, but then there's also extremely earnest, almost childlike characters that I think allowed me to sink into the style and connect with it on that more like heart level, as opposed to just like an intellectual exercise. And that's why, even though she's not really like a real person, Penelope, as played by Rachel Weisz, was a big part of that for me, was just let's plant this basically like childlike person in the middle of this crazy caper and to kind of see what happens.
Yeah. So it has that like same kind of, Wes Anderson does a lot of montage and fast cuts and cutaways to something random and like the camera movements and things like that. Yeah. I get the sense that maybe Rian Johnson was like, I want to see if I'm that kind of filmmaker with this movie. So in some ways because he never really, there are things in this movie that you can kind of see hints of in future projects, but he never gets this whimsical again. He never quite goes as overtly stylistic in a Wes Anderson sort of way.
Right.
And I'm a big Wes Anderson fan because I know a lot of people criticize Anderson of being like smug and pretentious, which I get, except for the fact that he's so damn funny and constantly pokes fun at himself for sure. And I think especially in his early works, like I think Royal Tenenbaums, which I love, and that and Darjeeling Limited have some moments in them where it definitely feels like I am a serious filmmaker, and so sometimes I get like why some people are like, okay, I get it, but there's this sense of like it's so exaggerated and it's always winking and it's always hysterical that I think I was watching Brothers Bloom and wanting a little bit more of that consistency in terms of like the humor. However, what you're saying about the sense of heart, the earnestness and the sincerity of it, I felt that 100%. I just constantly felt like there was just this vibe of Rian Johnson sort of not, this is going to sound mean and I don't mean it to be mean, but there is a sense that the movie thinks it's smarter than the audience. And it's like, you thought this, but now we're doing this and that, but not in a condescending way. I don't think he meant for it to come across like that, but I think because the movie is shaped around constant, like, oh, but this is what really happened. Oh, but is this really a con? Are they
twisty con
person?
Stuff. Yeah.
It becomes so twisty and so absurd in that style that it becomes very difficult to connect to emotionally. And I think the story and Adrian Brody and Rachel Weisz, their love story, which is sweet, and I love Bang Bang, and I love the relationship of all these characters, and I like the characters themselves, but it was hard at times to really empathize with them because the movie is so concerned with kind of its own cleverness. And again, it's not a condescending cleverness, and I think Johnson, I think he maybe understood that he went too far in terms of like the audience will only go with you for so long before they start to be like, okay, I get it. All right. What do I even care about now? I don't know what's real.
Right. Well, and the plot does get pretty convoluted, and you can't, like, I've never really 100% followed some of the twists and turns of their various cons, and what what is the money for this part, and what's the Russian, why do you need to work with the Russians on this? There's a lot of like plot jumps that, like, looking back at it now just from a critical writing perspective, definitely some pretty lazy plot jumps, and one part that I think reasonably you could argue like breaks the movie, if you kind of needed to piece out at that point, is when Rachel Weisz somehow talks herself out of basically being a person crawling through air ducts in a building that just blew up. Like,
I thought that was going to come back later.
That's impossible.
I think Rian Johnson's more clever than this, but I really thought that they were setting it up that she was going to be conning them the whole time.
Right.
So I thought, I was like, that's you're playing your hand a little bit too much. And then it turns out that's not actually the case. And it may have been a red herring. Like, Johnson was trying to be like, oh, you think something's up with her, but nothing's really up with her. But then it begs the question, how did she get out of that situation?
To me, it felt like it was falling back on whimsical character magic and not actual, good writing. That he painted himself into a corner with that sequence, that's a good thing. Like, it's always a good, I think, idea for a screenwriter to not know how they're going to get their characters out of a situation, because that means we, the audience, also don't know how it's possibly going to work out. Yeah. But then from there, you have to find a way that actually is believable for them to get out of it, that surprises the audience. And in this case, it was simply like, we're in this world of kind of whimsy and magic and playfulness, and Penelope's a crazy character who like has these random skill sets you don't expect. But I don't buy it. Like, it breaks the reality of the world, whatever was there, for her to just get out of that situation scot-free. It's not satisfying.
I agree. And I think that's also why with Wes Anderson, everything is so stylized, from the production design down to the costumes to the cinematography. Every element is so stylized that when something absurd happens, you roll with it in the way that you don't with this movie. Because the movie, it's not tone. It's consistency of, I guess it seems to take place in a real world. Everything, it's not stylized in a way where it's like a fairy tale, like a Tim Burton thing, where it's like it's slightly exaggerated.
It's like, definitely in this weird borderline, where it's like there are things with physics and car crashes and things that aren't entirely realistic, and then there are things that have like serious consequences and are totally grounded and realistic, and people can get hurt in a real way. And so it's trying to do both. And I think that's kind of the overall thing with this movie, is Rian Johnson's kind of trying to do everything, which maybe is a second movie thing also. If you have a lot pent up in you, if you've been wanting to direct your whole life,
and you get $30 million,
you finally get a bunch of money to make a movie. It's like, okay, I'm going to do everything I've always wanted to do and try it all out. And that can make for kind of a mess of a movie. But I think the love I have for this movie is that, it's the fact that I can feel this earnest, excited, passionate, like youthful director just going all out in a bunch of different directions. And at the heart of it all, there's like a good heartedness to it. Like, there's a lot of sweetness in the movie amidst all the kind of clever con stuff. Like, it's a clever con movie that's not trying to be like Ocean's 11, where even the love story is kind of like cool, like when they have a conversation about their love story, it's going to be like a cool conversation. But this movie, it's like a clever, twisty con artist heist movie with childlike innocence at its core. And even Adrian Brody's character, kind of, he is the younger brother who's always been more sensitive and kind of needed to be taken care of, and has these regrets from all the cons they've done. And so there's just a lot of like sensitivity and heart in the characters, which is not something you usually get from this genre, the kind of crime heist con movie.
That was Johnson's goal too, I think, is he really wanted to have that kind of sincere romance at the center of a very stylized genre that didn't typically lend itself to that. And I think what's great about Johnson's career is, in some ways, the fact that Rian Johnson was able to kind of bounce back and make like Looper and The Last Jedi and Knives Out. Like you said, that is the realization of what I think he really wanted to attempt here.
Right.
Being a Rian Johnson fan and looking at this film and its place in his filmography, you are willing to be more forgiving because you do sense that earnest desire to make something fun and big and to use all the tools at your disposal. I think the heart of the characters and their relationships is there, and it's just it's a structural thing. It's a storytelling thing where the story just there isn't, because I was thinking that from the beginning, like the flashback, it's almost in a way for like it's kind of foretelling sort of what the entire movie will be in terms of the style and how you won't be able to connect to it. Because I felt like I enjoy seeing this opening like of them as kids, but then I felt I don't know what this really contributes to the narrative. Like I feel like the opening scene could have just been them as adults. It kind of it plants that the older brother has always been using the younger brother and has been taking advantage of his like hopeless romanticism to like basically be like, all right, well, I'm going to use that and it's going to be the core of this con that we're going to pull off. But it was because of the fact that it goes on so long. I think it's like a 10-minute sequence, and or it felt like that, about that long, and I was like, this could have been like 2 or 3 minutes. And then trying to get a feel for the brothers, like what is their relationship? It was hard to get in those opening scenes, although I did appreciate all the Brick cast member cameos in that party sequence. It was hard to get a read on them, and it was hard to really like figure out who wants what.
Interesting.
Something else that threw me off, I think, was the inclusion of Diamond Dog later on in the film.
Well, and there's material that was cut from the film where like he played a bigger role and like is more explicit, kind of like the abuse that, you know, that's also part of the tonal shifts, you know, like it goes to these really heavy subjects, like maybe even like sexual abuse of foster kids. Right. Really, really kind of heavy stuff in the midst of an otherwise somewhat whimsical story.
Yeah.
So once again, I think there's kind of just too much here, and one movie can't really support all this. It's a little too convoluted, a little too many different topics.
I want to use this as a point of comparison to Knives Out, because if Knives Out is the real perfect realization of what Rian Johnson has been striving for in his filmography, and he's achieved that with that movie, I think what it is at the core is this movie doesn't have a Marta, because you think about Knives Out, and Knives Out is stylistic and it's fun and it's inviting the audience. It's more inviting, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that the audience empathy is so clearly focused on Marta from the beginning. Brothers Bloom wants to trick the audience, like constantly, like to constantly have us think like, wait, I thought this, is this really real? And everything has it has a sweet emotional payoff. I loved the final moments where
I think the movie sticks the landing, sticks the ending really well. Like I always do feel a lot of emotion in the end, and I like the kind of final twist and the final message of the movie. So it always leaves a good taste in my mouth. Like I always enjoy how the movie ends, for sure. Me too.
I really did like that a lot. And I think what Knives Out does that's so smart is, whereas the Brothers Bloom, I think if Knives Out had been the Brothers Bloom, the twist of what really happened with Marta and Christopher Plummer, his character, I think that would have been the ending of the film. Like, oh, this is what really happened. It was actually this. What Rian Johnson does really well is he puts like what you expect to be the twist ending. Like, oh, we're going to find out like what really happened at the end. He's like, no, that's going to happen at the end of the first act. Like you're going to find out exactly what happened. And then the audience has a surrogate, and they're very empathetic towards Marta, because Marta is somebody we know her upbringing. We know she has not a rough home life, but she's poor, and she genuinely loves this family and being a caretaker in particular for this character. So we have a lot of sympathy for her. And then because we understand, Johnson brilliantly lays it all out. So we perfectly, even though it's super like, wait, I switched to this and I did that, and it's like very confusing. So I realize I'm starting to get into some spoiler territory for Knives Out as well. So hopefully everyone listening.
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Spoiler alert. But what I think is brilliant about Knives Out and the difference between Knives Out and Brothers Bloom is that the character of Marta gives us somebody to root for specifically. And we're able to follow her journey, because then her journey is to basically like not get caught. And then when she starts when she starts to figure it out, or she's basically playing the role of the stereotypical villain, like trying to cover her tracks, but for like valid reason.
But
and
we're with her and we're rooting for her.
And Brothers Bloom doesn't necessarily have a character that you root for in a way, because it's so busy. It's so focused on the plot machinations and figuring out like, all right, how can I add a twist here and a twist there, that I think Johnson wants us to be rooting for the love story, but even that's a little too like not exaggerated. But I think Rachel Weisz's character in particular is so wacky in a way. That
it's not really like a real person. It's kind of this cartoonish character, which I enjoy a lot, and I like her performance. And she kind of just lets loose and has fun with it.
Bloom, on the other hand, is sincere. Like Adrian Brody plays him as a straight man, which he is the straight man of the movie. But I think that's the tough thing, and perfectly evocative of the weird kind of contradictory tones of the movie in that relationship.
I would argue that Adrian Brody's character does have a clear arc in the movie, and I do feel maybe person to person you might not really care about him, but I did find that there was a good setup of, you know, this kid basically has essentially like this childhood origin of guilt around the fact that him and his brother have figured out a way to like kind of get by doing these cons of people. But Adrian Brody, with kind of the hopeless romantic, sensitive heart, doesn't like ultimately the feeling that he gets at the end of these cons, where he realizes they've used people, they've taken advantage of them, they've maybe created, you know, his brother's idea that it's like you made them believe in a lie, but it was a lie they wanted to believe. You know, they were excited to believe in this lie, so everybody got what they wanted. But Adrian Brody has this really uncomfortable feeling with that. And then on top of that, he feels that he's been playing all these roles for so long, he genuinely doesn't know anymore who he really is and what it would feel like to really fall in love, because he's been pretending to fall in love or pretending to be this or that. And I don't know if that's actually the most, you know, compelling story, but I do think the movie, if it does have one thematic through line that is solid and pays off, it's the idea of an unwritten life. And that comes up very explicitly throughout the movie, but it's about Adrian Brody wanting to understand what it's like to have a real experience that isn't constructed by his brother, and to really fall in love and have it be real and yada yada.
Yeah.
So I think that is something I hook onto in the movie, and that does feel like it's there the whole time and isn't messed up by the convoluted plot in the way that other elements are.
That's a really good point. And I think that speaks to, I'll add to that. I think the ending of the film, which I think we both agree is one of the strongest elements of the film, the emotional payoff, because I think I liked Bloom. I liked him, but is it Steven?
Steven, his brother. Yeah, Mark Ruffalo.
Steven. So Steven was such an enigma.
Yes.
That it was hard to, you empathize with Bloom naturally. I think that's the way Johnson intended. And you're a little bit more like, I don't know how I feel about Steven. So there is, in terms of what I'm looking for from the film, is the story of these brothers and how is that going to pay off. And the movie, like, it plays the cards close to its chest for the entire film, which is part of the problem, is we're not really let in on it until the very end when we get an actual legitimate emotional release.
Right.
But what's kind of beautiful about that, and as a completion to the arc of these two brothers and their relationship, essentially Steven's ultimate final con is tricking his brother into having a real, what he's always wanted. Like, he basically set his brother up to have the happy life that he desired, but just felt like he never really had gotten. And like through this elaborate, and it's almost accidentally, obviously, because at the end we discover that none of this was planned and this was not part of the con.
Well, but his final con, should we just do spoiler alert ending stuff right now?
Let's do it. Let's
spoiler alert. How about the ending?
Spoilers.
Yeah. So I think what works for me about it is, it obviously doesn't go according to plan. I don't think Mark Ruffalo's character intended to die. But what I think is beautiful is it kind of reminded me of very different movie, but the Italian the Italian Holocaust film Life is Beautiful.
Let's go.
I can't
Let's
believe I'm comparing these. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's basically about a father kind of protecting his son from, the trauma of the Holocaust by essentially like making it all kind of a game or a story that they're getting through. And I think what's beautiful about the ending to me is that Steven, Mark Ruffalo's character, makes a decision to kind of send his brother off with their last memory being this happy one where they pulled off their con and everything's all right and it's all going to be okay. And that in itself is a con. Like he is conning his brother one last time to kind of make their last memory together a sweet one. And so I think they do so much good setup of
blood on
the problem with blood is it never turns rusty. And so it feels like it's just a really satisfying payoff of the final con of the brother is this act of love to kind of spare his younger brother, their last memory being a sad one.
I agree. Yeah.
So all that stuff plugs in for me, which helps the movie. For me, that oftentimes a movie can be a mess, but if it lands and it makes me feel something deeply by the end, I forgive a lot because
give it a pass. Yeah,
it's like
I agree.
You maybe and the music too. I think something about the music in this movie that is so delightful. And there's a lot of themes. Like there's there's a Penelope's theme, and
I noticed that too. Yeah,
it's a lot of movies that are in this kind of genre often don't have the kind of thematic score that you would expect from like a Lord of the Rings or a Star Wars, where there's like very clear, memorable themes associated with characters or places or whatnot. And it's fun. I always really resonate when a movie has a couple really good themes and then utilizes them in the right places for maximum emotional effect. And I find this movie does that really well.
The music really brings the sincerity, I think, at points where
maybe
what's happening on screen doesn't necessarily deserve it, but like there are exchanges, particularly between Penelope and Bloom. Maybe what's on screen isn't quite up to par, but the music sells it. Right. In a way where you're like, oh, this is kind of sweet, even though like Penelope's really bizarre. I do also want to say, I think Rachel Weisz is so great in this movie, even though I don't love her character. I think her willingness to just be like so game and have so much,
it's very selfless of her actually to take on this role, because it's not. You could not argue it's like a well-written female role. Like it's her character isn't really a real character.
It's almost like a tier just above Natalie Portman in Garden State, where it's like it's the manic pixie dream girl situation.
Absolutely. And once again, reflecting on it now from the vantage of 2021, it's so clearly that in a way that I wasn't really thinking about back when it came out. But given that, she seems to have a blast with it. Like she just lets loose. She has a lot of fun with some like really ridiculous lines and situations.
I think one of the funniest moments in the film is the thunderstorm during the train and her being like, I'm so horny. And then it just cuts to him going, good night, and leaving. So good. But again, completely I mean, they both play off each other really well, but it is like this moment of like, is this supposed to be funny? Am I supposed to like, what is going on in the scene? Well, and then it punctuates with that perfect punchline at the end. But
there's a real oddball sense of humor that you can tell Rian Johnson has, where he kind of just likes unexpected random stuff. I think in that same scene, she's like, you're effing constipated in your soul. But she sells it in this weird way. Like she like owns that line, and in her drunken state, it kind of makes sense she would say that. Yeah. So he gives the actors ridiculous lines and things that shouldn't work, but it's kind of got this Rian Johnson oddball sensibility about it. And what I do like about Rachel Weisz and the whole cast really is they just go with it, and they do the best they can with it and have fun with it.
They are fully committed to it. And I think if any one of them had a moment of cynicism, I think I have the feeling like Johnson was like, look, we've got to commit. You guys have got to commit to this. Right. It's going to be wacky. It's going to be weird, but like, just you guys are going to be the
Just
ones
go
that
with
sell it.
Yeah.
I think I really think, you know, Rachel Weisz is great, but I think the hero of this movie is Rinko Kikuchi.
Yes.
As Bang Bang, who Bang Bang is, talk about like, or I was watching an interview with Rian Johnson where he was just talking about having to explain to her what her character was and being like, when you read the script, please understand that you're going to be so much more involved than what is suggested on the page, because she has no dialogue.
Right.
And, you know, it's like, what is she like winking, or is she like, what is she doing in this scene? And she, just by her sheer charisma and presence and just the ridiculousness of her character, is able to pull off this really like fun, zany idea of some, like whatever it is, and make it feel like, oh, this is great. It doesn't feel like annoying. I feel like that character could have been really obnoxious if played the wrong way or directed the wrong way.
And she feels consistent, actually. Like,
yeah,
her character feels very consistent throughout, in a interesting way, which is credit to her for which is the way she kind of plays her expressions and her sort of. It's almost like she's above it all. She's just kind of along for the ride and kind of bemused by these silly people, and then she kind of pieces out when she decides it's time to go.
Done. Yeah,
which I kind of love. But, you know, all this is making me realize, you know, this movie, it's really a director showcase. It's about the cinematography. It's about the editing. It's about the music. It's about all these elements that when I was a young aspiring filmmaker were just very exciting, because it was all inspiration, or kind of raw material to draw from. Of, wow, I love the momentum of this. Oh, I love this shot. I love this transition from between these two shots. I love this musical cue. So I think so much of what inspired me about it was the directing aspect of it. And now that I've spent so much time in screenplay land, you know, with lessons from the screenplay and beyond the screenplay, it's really interesting how my, you know, its favorite status has definitely shifted, because it's definitely a favorite in the directing world, maybe, but definitely not in the writing world.
Yeah, well, I know we've talked a lot about like what we have enjoyed and what we didn't necessarily enjoy about it, but what, in terms of, was there anything else for you, just in terms of watching it this latest viewing, that really stood out to you, as far as like things that you noticed that you might not have noticed before, like beyond even just the structure of the film? Like, are there things that you remember really loving when you were younger that maybe now don't hold up?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think there was a time, you know, with Kill Bill and a certain kind of aesthetic of wacky, cool things, like people walking in slow motion with this this musical cue is going to come on. You know, like the end of the opening sequence when the brothers start just walking in slow motion. It's not really even that amazing a shot, but the music comes on, and then the title is like Broadway lights exploding on with the spotlights. It's a little bit over the top, and I think there was a moment in time when that was all like really exciting.
That was the rage.
It was like, oh yeah, like this is like a Quentin Tarantino shot where like the music.
Yeah, it was like, how many ideas can you fit into a single movie, even if the movie doesn't necessarily justify the visual ideas or the wackiness of it.
Well, but I think there was an irreverence to that. I think a lot of it is because Kill Bill came out around then, and there was this kind of excitement about just cool style stuff. Yes, and now it feels more trite and feels kind of more annoying, and I kind of don't have as much patience for it. So I think that that was kind of a revelation watching it again, which is like, I'm not as impressed by this random moment of music and slow motion and blah blah blah, because it doesn't really mean anything. Like, it's not actually meaningful. It's just a thing that was cool at the time. So that was probably the biggest change in my viewing experience, was not being as enthralled by the stylistic moments that don't actually contribute to the story or character arcs meaningfully, but are just there because why not? And I think at the time, those were all very exciting at the time when I first saw this. You know, it was like, oh, how awesome that he's doing all this. But now I'm just kind of frustrated. It's like, it's too much.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. And for me, I think what it ultimately comes down to is a movie can be creatively exhausting and just be zany. This is a completely left field example, but it just came to mind. But have you seen Kung Fu Hustle?
I have not.
Kung Fu Hustle is amazing. I won't spoil it, but it is a wacky comedy action. Like, it is overflowing with ideas. And one second it's like the most amazing fight choreography you've ever seen, like played kind of for laughs, but mostly straight face. And then all of a sudden it's legit Looney Tunes, absurd sequence of like comedic slapstick. But I think what ultimately anchors those kinds of movies is, can you follow an emotional journey? Like, is there like almost like, because Kung Fu Hustle is kind of a hero's journey, like it's pretty straightforward in that way, and it has some twists and turns that are a little bit outside that genre, and it does a few things that are different. But for the most part, like, there is a very clear arc to follow that I think Brothers Bloom doesn't necessarily have as prevalently, or at the very least, like, it plays it so close to the chest that the fact that the final scene when Brody is breaking down and realizing that his, you know, what his brother has done for him, that to me is like, oh, now I kind of understand it, but this is also like the final 10 minutes of
Right.
a 2-hour film.
Right.
I think, and it's, you can get away with the zaniness and the insanity and the constant like creative inclinations and impulses, as long as you have something an audience member can follow that sort of invites them in. In a lot of cases, it is just like, who's the hero, and like, what is their journey, and like, does it feel fulfilling to see them finally get to the end of the story, achieving or not achieving that?
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like it didn't hit for you, but I do think what is supposed to be there as the thing you latch onto is Adrian Brody's basically going back and forth and how he feels about the fact that they're even doing this con on this particular woman. You know, he gets really concerned when she's like doing childlike like sketchbook things about Penelope the smuggler, Penelope the con artiste. And I think really the whole movie is about his back and forth on is he going to go through with this at the end, or not the end, but kind of in the climax in Mexico. There's a nice Rian Johnson switcheroo where you feel like he's making the choice to run away with her, to not finish the con. Let's just get out of here. But that ends up being part of the con. It's yeah. But she figures it out, and she sees the blood pack and everything. So I get what you mean, where it's like, because that was part of the con, that almost undercuts his story, and you don't know what's real or what's not.
Yeah.
But I do think that is what you're meant to latch onto, is the hero's journey for him is that question of, do I finish this con? This is the last one. Do I not finish it? Do I get her out of this because she's taking it way too seriously? When she comes back at the end, it's kind of like he feels like he is just bad for her, and it's not like, he kind of just wants her to think he's dead at this point, so she never gets hurt again. And so he wants to do this con where they pretend to die at the end. So I think all of it is about that ultimately, but because, like you've been saying, it's so twisty and turny, and you're never sure what's real, what's not. It kind of undercuts your ability to be with him. Yeah.
It's always interesting, and this is not to say, because I think that is an on-point read, and it's definitely, for this being my first viewing, and because it's so twisty-turny, and because it really is hard to get a read on, I think it's interesting how we as viewers can, when you love a film, and it doesn't matter if it's like a great film or just a personal favorite, like we can latch onto it and we can impose not necessarily meaning that's not there, but like we are willing to put in the time and effort to really say like, no, but I respond to something in this and I want to pick out these things, but the reason I mention this is because this isn't necessarily a film like I feel like I'm going to rush out and watch again.
Right.
But there is a part of me that feels like, well, now that I know the ending, and so much of, I think what was a hurdle for me was trying to figure out like, where is this going?
Right.
Now that I know that ending, it does make me wonder if I go back and watch this again at some point, maybe if I'm going through like a Rian Johnson kick and I just want to go through all his films,
right?
Like, am I going to appreciate it more because of the fact that I am able to put more things into context because I know where it's going? I think there are some great films. I can't think of, this isn't like a good example in terms of like, oh, it's a twisty turny plot, but I think a film like Inside Llewyn Davis, where you have a lot of Coen brothers films do this, where you are kind of put off a little bit by some of maybe the emotional coldness, or maybe in Llewyn Davis's case, the main character is kind of unlikable in a way, and you're almost put off by like, do I want to spend time with him? Do I really care about him? But that's a film that I've gone back and watched since, and I love it more and more each time.
Yeah,
and
I love that movie.
Yeah. I think Brothers Bloom, well, I don't think it's inside Llewyn Davis.
It certainly is not. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an element though of like, can you go back and rewatch it and gain that stuff?
Yeah.
So I am curious about that.
Well, and once again, I do think that if you're spending, which is a reasonable way to spend the first viewing of this movie, just trying to sort out what's happening and kind of being unsure of what's real, what's not, what am I supposed to be thinking about this? It's pretty distracting. You know, like there's a lot of work the audience might be doing on a first viewing that is not letting them just enjoy the moment. And I think this movie, ultimately, I enjoy it mostly on an aesthetic level. You know, it's enjoying the shot composition, enjoying the way things flow together, the way music kicks in and we jump to some pretty European location. That it's just all very pleasurable in that way. And so if you're not worrying about the plot anymore and just able to enjoy it on that level, it's a very lovely Rian Johnson globetrotting ride. Yeah.
It does feel like, it feels like a transitionary film. And I mean that not in a bad way, but in a way of like, you really do get the sense of him discovering himself as a filmmaker with no limitations placed on him.
Right.
Like he's like, well, I'm going to go for broke. And you see in later films the lessons that he learns. Because a lot of, and I've called Last Jedi out for this as well, and have since kind of like, I think my enjoyment and appreciation for The Last Jedi has only grown in recent years. But I think something you could accuse Johnson of is sometimes being like twisting things up for the sake of it. Like he just enjoys like keeping the audience on their toes or making them think one thing and then pulling the rug out. I think Brothers Bloom is actually the example where he learned, okay, you can go too far with that. Like, even though people point out Last Jedi, like, oh, he does a lot of weird stuff in that movie, that for the most part is it's not twist for the sake of twists. He learned how to imbue it with thematic relevance. Like with Last Jedi.
It's all on theme.
Exactly. And same with Knives Out and Looper. It's been a long time since I've seen Looper. I remember the second half of that film kind of throwing me off because suddenly it was like, wait, is this an X-Men movie now? What is this?
Looper felt really uneven to me, actually. Like I was not actually one of the super fans of Looper. So yeah, I should revisit it. I've only seen it once or twice, but
Say I've only seen it the one time and I enjoyed it, but I felt the same way where I was not like bowled over by it, but I was like, this is pretty cool. I just don't know. Again, do I need to go? Because this is, I mean, Looper is the movie that followed Brothers Bloom. So maybe some of that is still him.
I feel like in Looper, he is still sorting things out because that movie tonally also felt a little bit all over the place. Like it had extreme darkness and people's limbs falling off in real time as they were being sawed off in the past, and this like kind of like revenge massacre like sequence at the end. It's supposed to be kind of awesome, I guess, but I kind of just feel uncomfortable about it all. I couldn't tell if it was like a fun movie or just like a really dark, like grisly movie or what. So I feel like Rian Johnson, I admire his ambition and his kind of swinging for the fences and just really going for things. But I think it took him until Knives Out, honestly, for me to land like a perfect movie where everything here belongs. It all feels of a whole, like it's just a perfect little package, and I love it.
Talk about an insane, like, okay, so as a filmmaker, how many filmmakers can say they learned how to be a better filmmaker and in the process also made a Star Wars movie as a stepping stone to get to their perfect realization of what they were trying to express cinematically? I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. What's interesting about Knives Out is he made it fast. Like he wrote it fast and he made it fast. It was because it was very topical. It was of a time. It was very 2019. And I think maybe that's partially why it felt so cohesive. Maybe it was good for him to not overthink, not kind of go down a rabbit hole of trying to put everything into one movie, but just like, I'm going to make a simple, for him, simple murder mystery movie. But of course, because he's him, he's going to make it extra hard and interesting.
Yes.
But yeah, I wonder if there's something about just having the constraints of writing something quickly, making it quickly, that allowed Knives Out to feel really cohesive in a way that his other films haven't.
What else? Is there anything else we want to say about Brothers Bloom that you feel needs to be said?
The last thing I'll say is watching it again, I remembered the moment I fell in love with the movie, which is the long take of Rachel Weisz doing a card trick while she kind of tells a parable about
I loved that. Yeah.
writing the story of her life. And it's the kind of thing where, once again, as like an older, cynical, like adult person, like that shot and that moment and the music and what she's saying isn't like adding up to a whole lot. Like, it doesn't actually mean much. But once again, as a young aspiring filmmaker, there was a magic happening on screen where it's like he's going to do a long take where she actually does a card trick live on screen. Her theme song is going to play for the duration of the card trick, and it's going to time out perfectly with her little monologue. And all those things combining were the kind of just magic directing things that just got me really excited. And they don't necessarily add up to anything or form a cohesive, amazing whole like Knives Out, but there were a lot of little pleasures in this movie that I still find delightful. So it's like a really messy, like ugly stepchild of the Rian Johnson filmography, but I love its parts.
But you love it. You love it. Yeah. I mean, it's part of the family.
I love it for what it is, and it's got a lot of like beautiful parts that I still very much enjoy revisiting.
So what do you think? As far as our final rating system, I was just thinking cons. Cons feels like the movie is full of cons. So how many cons would you give Brothers Bloom, with 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest?
Well, it's hard because is it like 2021 me or past me? Because past me would have been like 4.5 stars. Like this movie's so just cool and unique, and I love Rian Johnson and I love everything he's doing. And I'm probably going to bump that down at least a star to 3.5 stars, where I'm still personally like enjoying the scenery of this movie, but I can't really put it up in that 4-star range anymore. Yeah.
I'd say 3 for me. And it is, I think it's well worth a watch. It is so cool for all the reasons you stated, as like just the joy of someone discovering what they're capable of as a filmmaker. And in turn, like you said, it is inspiring. And I completely see, as a young budding filmmaker, how you would be so like, oh wow, you can do that. Like you can do something like a card trick, or you can do something like a ridiculous cutaway, or
like the lighting changing on the boats for a dramatic moment, kind of in this tongue-in-cheek, theatrical way.
There's a lot of fun exploration of like, what am I capable of as a filmmaker? And I love that it's clearly, it was a project where I believe Johnson learned a lot, and it was probably as much of a learning experience for him as it was like just us watching it and recognizing its place in his filmography. But it's well worth a watch. I'd probably rank this as the lowest on my list of Johnson, but not in a way that's like, oh, it's terrible. It's definitely worth seeing.
He hasn't made a bad movie. Everything he's made has been interesting and is worth checking out, I think.
For sure. Well, Alex, thank you so much for the opportunity. Now I finally, my Rian Johnson filmography is complete. So thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. And the world needs more Alex Calleros in it, I think. I just think if people are out there thinking like, where is Alex? I love this guy so much. Where can I find more of him? There's like a little itty bitty YouTube channel and podcast. Can you tell the people at home about these things, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a writer and editor for a couple different YouTube channels now. We've got Lessons from the Screenplay, and we also now have a sister channel called Story Mode, which is focusing on the art of storytelling in video games, which is really exciting to me because I think some of the most amazing just media experiences I've had in recent years have actually been in the video game world. And
definitely,
there's just so much interesting stuff happening there. So we're really excited to keep talking to video game writers, creators, directors, and learning about how they approach story, because it's a different medium than film and has different possibilities and different opportunities than film, which is really exciting. So anyway, those are 2 video essay channels on YouTube. And then also I'm a co-host of Beyond the Screenplay, which is myself and the Lessons from the Screenplay team, Trisha, Brian, Michael, just basically hanging out and doing a deeper dive analysis of movies that are coming out, our favorite movies, stuff we're covering on the channel. And recently,
and you guys just did
Yeah.
a Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's the 20th anniversary of the first Lord of the Rings film, believe it or not.
Jesus.
And you guys just did an amazing series of podcasts for the 3 Lord of the Rings films, and then a Patreon exclusive upcoming for just the Hobbit trilogy.
Yes. That was a very interesting conversation.
I can't wait. I can't wait. So that's awesome. And where can people find you on the social medias?
So you can find me on Twitter. My handle is @Alex_Calleros. And on Instagram, it is basically the same, but replace that underscore with a dot. It's alex.calleros on Instagram.
I'm at YayShondorman on Twitter. And at Shawn, I think it's Shondorman. I'm on Letterboxd as Shondorman. Like you, it's like Shondorman one place, and it's YayShondorman another place. You'll find, just look for Shondorman. But
Google us.
Would love Google us. We're all over Google. We're really big on Google. I want to hear all kinds of Rian Johnson hot takes. Ryan, if you're listening, we love you. Let's hear some behind the scenes dirt on the Brothers Bloom production. Like what is Adrian, the real gossip, Adrian Brody, what does he like to eat for breakfast? Why is that hot gossip? I have no idea. But please let us know where Brothers Bloom ranks, if you've seen it, if you haven't seen it, if you're a big fan. I'd love to hear about it. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you again, Alex. Always a pleasure to have you on. And we will see you all at the movies.